Bernadette, my love, welcome back to the show. You are one of my favorite repeat guests because honestly, we just fucking vibe. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's always a good time. We always have really insightful and unique conversations around money. And I just feel like you're one of these girls that just gets it. Like why we need to be talking about this, why this needs to be mainstream, why we need to be unapologetic about our pursuit of wealth, because it's not just about the numbers in the bank. It is really about fucking empowerment, like in all the ways. So first and foremost, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Anytime there's an invitation from your team to come here, I'm like, yes, sign me up.
And we're here for a very special occasion. You're actually coming out with a brand new book, Crush Your Money Goals, dropping December 10th. I am so excited for you because, again, we need so many more of these conversations, and especially for people of color, women of color, like to see ourselves represented on the cover of books. You're on the cover of your book. I'm on the cover of mine. There's something very powerful that almost serves like as an invitation when you see someone that you can relate to that's talking about a topic that you want to learn about. So let's dive right in. First and foremost, for folks who are encountering you for the first time, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hello, everyone. I am Bernadette Joy. I'm the founder at Crush Your Money Goals. I am primarily a money and business coach who happens to create content. A lot of people think that content creating is actually my first job, but it's actually my side gig, I would say. And I teach a framework that is called Crush Your Money Goals, and it spells out the 5 steps that you would take to build wealth, to pay down debt, to save and invest. And it's based off of my own personal story of my husband and I paying off $300,000 of debt and building our first $1 million of net worth. And actually, I would love to go back and listen to our last episode, but I feel like we've made some significant, I don't know that I was at the 1 million in investments yet at the time that we last spoke, but we just crossed over our first $1 million in investments, not just net worth. And so I'm really excited about conversations with women like you who we can talk more about. Yes, important around financial literacy, absolutely around paying off debt and all those things. But I also want to elevate these conversations about what we can do once we reach wealth.
I love it. And so for folks who want to tune into Bernadette's original story, we actually have done 2 episodes together. Episode 77 called How to Crush Your Money Goals, and episode 150, How to Manage Wealth Guilt. Because guess what? Even after you get rich, you still got mental health issues. FYI. So
and they're just bigger and more expensive.
Absolutely. Okay. They just morph into something else. So we're going to go ahead and link those episodes in the show notes so you can go ahead and check them out. All right. So let's just do a quick recap of your financial journey for folks who are tuning in for the first time and learning more about you. You have an incredible debt freedom story, but that's not where this has ended for you. So just give us kind of like the high level overview of what was that pinnacle moment for you when you realized things needed to change, and some of the strategic things that you put into place to make this now a reality where you paid off debt, you are now a millionaire by all definitions, and now you're teaching other people how to do this.
Yeah. It's fun that you asked me this question because now that I'm saying it every year, I'm farther and farther removed from the origin of it, that I don't know about you, but sometimes you remember things differently as you get farther away from it. And so I remember thinking in January 2016, I had $72,000 of student loans to pay. And I was just like, I have no job. I have no kind of prospect on how I'm going to pay this all off. And I really want to start a business. How do I do all of that? And the only information I could find online was around like Dave Ramsey and other legacy financial gurus. And some of it was really helpful, but some of it didn't feel helpful, especially as a woman of color. And so I embarked on this journey back in 2016, which is wild to say it was 8 years ago now, where I was like, I just want to focus on paying off my student loans. And so I, along with my husband, we focused on paying off $72,000 in less than a year after I graduated from my MBA program. And then we were like, well, let's keep the momentum going. Let's work off paying off our mortgages and all of our regular bills, like credit cards, like all the usual stuff that people have. And then I found myself in 2019 at the age of 34, having like a paid off home and being completely debt free, and was like, wait, I thought I wasn't going to do this until I was like 65. So what do I do now for the next 30 years? And that's when we learned more about the financial independence movement, which I've now leaned more towards the acronym of FINE, which is Financial Independence Next Endeavor. Because I realized the original acronym is Financial Independence Retire Early, which a lot of people that listen to you probably have heard about at some point. But then it morphed into financial independence, relax every day. Then I realized that I had all this wealth guilt from our last conversation and I wasn't relaxing every day. So it's just like, that doesn't feel like right to me right now. So now I've been following this idea of financial independence next endeavor. Like, what's this next thing that I'm looking forward to? And it doesn't always have to be about making money. So fast forward to 2024, where we are now, I've gotten to encapsulate all of this journey in what is now the book coming out. And I've also been able to expand out what I do in terms of coaching to not just focus on personal finance, but growing income and now moving into investing.
That's incredible, and it's always like so eye-opening, I think, for folks to look back on their journeys and just realize how far they've come. It can be kind of like we're in autopilot when we're driving towards these goals, whether it's debt freedom or hitting a certain net worth and things like that. And there's so many things that come into play that you also have to like navigate life, for instance, while you're doing all this stuff, right? Your family's doing its thing, your friend circle, you personally, like there's different things that happen that make us evolve on this journey. And one of the interesting things that you've talked about is how you went from a homeowner back to renting, which is like such a revolutionary concept for people because everybody sees homeownership as like the end all be all. It's like we rent until we can put ourselves in a position to own a home. And then like going back is very contrary to what we're told is like the correct thing to do. So can you give us some insight into what your perspective is on that?
It is always a hot topic when I mention to people that, yes, I'm a millionaire and I have $1 million worth of investments and I still rent. And what's been more interesting is that people assume that I just don't know the beauty of home ownership. It's like, no, I owned 3 homes.
Paid in full.
Sold them. Paid in full. And then sold those things and went back to renting. And I'm not going to propose that that's for everybody and everyone should like sell all their assets and go back to renting. Why it's worked for me specifically is that my husband and I, we just decided that we're not suburban people. We don't like mowing the lawn. We were gone more than we were at home for the last couple of years. We've just prioritized traveling a lot. And so anytime we would come back home, not only would our grass be like super high and like cobwebs everywhere, whatever, but then our neighbors would be like, so your grass looks a little high. And I was just like, I'm so over this right now. And so we said, okay, we'll sell the house. Let's like actually live in the part of town that we want to live in, which we would be priced out of if we tried to buy a home. And so that was one of the other big revelations is that in like 50 of the biggest cities in the country, it's cheaper to rent than it is to buy a home, generally speaking. And for me, someone who loves arts, and as part of my business, I meet a lot of people every day. It was more convenient for me to live in city center, where I live in Charlotte, than to be out where I was, where the house was more affordable. Because where I live now, like the houses are like $1.5 million. So for us, it made sense from a lifestyle perspective. But also what was really interesting, which people just don't talk enough about, was that in our case, we took the proceeds of the home and we went and invested it. Instead of, just letting it do whatever, we decided to invest it. And now we make enough money off of the dividends and interest that would cover our rent. So when people say like, oh, well, you're just throwing away money on rent. I'm like, I actually kind of am not. I'm kind of living rent free right now, actually. And I don't have to do all this stuff. Plus, my favorite part about renting, especially if you go to some of these newer communities, we have access to all these amenities and all of these like community events that I know as an introvert, I normally would not do. And I don't have to go very far to find some people to hang out with or play board games with or whatever, because they live in my building and we have the opportunity to do that. So for me, it's also been a really great step forward in mental health, where we're not spending a lot of time on fixing the stuff around our house. We're just actually building relationships. That's what we decided we were going to focus on the next couple of years.
I think more people need to talk about how much of your disposable income is freed up when you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars maintaining a property. Like I've absolutely noticed in my own journey how renting has allowed me to really accelerate my own investing to the point where I don't think I could have done this if I was still a homeowner, just because that shit sucks up a lot of your money. I mean, like in the first year of home ownership, I must have spent at least like $40,000 in repairs because I bought a home that was like 100 years old. The freaking sewer line ended up having cement in it because they did a DIY reno and I had to replace that shit like 2 weeks after moving in, take a 401k loan. Things just add up, y'all. And this was back in 2016. I can only imagine like what it costs to hire contractors now with the level of inflation that we've seen and just supply chain issues and things like that. So like it's becoming more and more apparent that a lot of these things that are quote unquote part of the American dream like home ownership, like affording a family. These are becoming like luxuries for the wealthy. These are not things that are accessible to the average American, which is making about $75,000 a year, like household income.
Mm-hmm. And, I would even take it a step further to say, even for some people who have that income, it's not a no-brainer decision anymore. So for me and my husband, even though we can afford a relatively high mortgage, if we decide to go buy a home, or here's the crazy thing, like we have enough money to go buy a home in cash right now, and we're still choosing not to because of all of those costs that you just talked about, but also it would drastically change our lifestyle where we fine with where we are right now. But also, then to sink that money into an asset that may or may not grow more. Everyone always just assumes that real estate will always appreciate. And yes, for the last couple of years, it's gone crazy, but we're starting to see, because I still look at homes all the time just to see what's going on. And we're seeing homes sitting in the market for much longer now because people thought they could get 2021, 2022 prices, and they're not realistic anymore. And so it's really, really interesting that I thought that when I was, first of all, I never thought I would be in a position to pay for a home in cash. Then the fact that I can pay for a home in cash right now and I still don't want to, that says something about what the housing market really looks like for the average American right now. Like it just doesn't make sense.
I think a lot of people just don't ask themselves to like, does this suit my personality? Does this suit where I am in life right now? It's just a lot of us have this. I am a certain age. I am a certain demographic. I have a certain career. I should have this shit that adults have. And it's like, but why? Do you actually want to maintain a house? Like, and even for folks who are thinking about like rental real estate as a thing, do you want to be the person that has to get a phone call at 2 a.m. because you need to now schedule a plumber to come and replace a toilet that exploded at your tenant's house?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we don't ask ourselves, are you willing and able to deal with the shit that comes with this? For instance, for me here living in the state of Florida, do I want to be fucking dealing with hurricanes all the time? Like, do I want my house to blow away? I mean, right now I'm kind of like, I love it here, so I'm willing to go down that rabbit hole. But also, am I ever going to live near the water? Fuck out of here. Okay. So it's just like, you have to ask yourself these practical questions about like, are you not just financially equipped, but are you like mentally and emotionally equipped for the burden that comes with a lot of these financial decisions?
Yeah. And, I'll say this because it actually just came up this morning. We always talk about this hypothetical people because people online will always fight me about whenever I say that I think renting is a good decision, I always get these people who are like, you're stupid and you know what you're talking about. Right. And as a financial coach, it's one of those topics that I coach people on a regular basis. And literally right before this recording, I was coaching a client who is in her like early 30s and she is like hell bent on buying a home. And so I literally asked her why. And she started listing all of the things that you just said. And it literally sounded like I could have put any other person in that same seat and it would have sounded very similar. So like, she literally said, I'm of a certain age. And in order to be an adult, I need to have a home and I have this business and I feel like I live in an apartment right now and I would be more comfortable and I would have more autonomy if I own my home or whatever. And I said, I've been coaching you for the last 2 months. Every time I meet you, you say, you don't have time. So when are you going to have time to maintain this home? And when you're going to have time to do all these projects that you think you're going to do? And I said to her, and she said, oh, and I want to have kids because, time is ticking. And I was just like, I mean, modern medicine is wild to me because one of my best friends, she's turning 40 this year and she's having her first child, right?
Hello, so, 39.
Exactly, right? I wasn't going to say it for you, but, like, she's like, oh, I must have a kid because once, and it's true. I'm not saying that that's not true, but it's not impossible. And so everything she was saying, and I said to her, you do understand that you can do all these things without owning a home. And also, if you just want a bigger house, you can just rent a house. And the thought literally just didn't even cross her mind because it was either live in an apartment or buy a home. And there's actually all of this all of this stuff in between.
Yes, it is good to really understand the full picture of things. One of the things that I also love about the way that you teach personal finance is like, you're just really big on practicality. You're not here to use sensationalism and a lot of the bullshit that we see in the mainstream media to motivate people. You come with really practical advice. And I'd love to start with your acronym, CRUSH. What does CRUSH actually stand for folks who don't know?
Yes, I love CRUSH. It's evolved over. C is curate your accounts. R is reverse into independence. U is understand your net worth. S is spend intentionally. And H is heal your money wounds. And why it's relevant, why I'm saying that it was a completely different version a couple of years ago is because I actually, when I first did Crush, the first one was, I don't even remember. It was like something about like creating a money mindset or something like that. And it started out with mindset first. And where I've been kind of like quote unquote controversial or just like different from what other people think is like a lot of coaches start out with mindset first. And I actually start out with like practical, like, here's a thing you need to do first. And then along the way, we'll work on your mindset. And so that's why Heal Your Money Wounds is actually the last step and not the first step. In the beginning, I was just like, hey, I just met you. Tell me all your trauma, even though we just met. And now I realize actually in order for someone to really open up about the real trauma around their money, they have to trust the process and they have to trust that there's going to be some tangible results that they can rely on. And so that's why the first step became curating your accounts of like, let's just clean up your stuff first and build that confidence before we get into like, let's talk about, therapy type of stuff.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because when I'm thinking of like parallel journey that we might take as somebody who's trying to like self-improve in some way, like let's say you want to get really healthy. The first thing you're going to need is like a diet and exercise plan. And you have to start doing it to start seeing like the results that then reinforce you to continue to do that stuff. You're not necessarily going to be in like this gung ho, I'm going to run a triathlon energy on day one. That kind of mindset gets formed as you see that progress and as you feel yourself getting stronger and you reinforce and keep doing the stuff that's working and you stop doing the shit that's not working. So I think psychologically, it makes a lot of sense to kind of weave that mindset into the whole journey versus thinking you're just going to tackle that shit in the beginning.
And I would also say I ended up having a lot of clients early on in my coaching career where they were like just stuck in the mindset piece. Like they were so addicted to self-development that they weren't actually executing anything. And so one of my favorite clients who's been with me for a long time, she knows, if she listens to this episode, she knows who I'm talking about, where she knows that she like spends a lot of time on trying to like pump herself up and motivate herself versus what we've done over the years is just like, no, you know what actually builds confidence? You know what actually builds a level of self-awareness is when you actually do the things that you said you were going to do and you stick to your word. And then you'll start seeing where you have some weaknesses that you have to work on instead of just saying like, oh, I just need to be motivated today. And so it's been really fun. I know, right? And that's the other thing, right? Is I wrote this book, but also this entire framework is based on the idea that you're not going to be motivated every day. And actually, the vast majority of days, you're not going to feel motivated. So that's why I decided to reframe my framework over the last years to focus on not knowledge, but habits. Like, how do you actually build habits, things that you're tangibly doing versus things that you just think you should know?
Love it. Okay. So you're actually including 25 money habits in the book, 5 with each one of these letters for Crush. So can we go through like your favorite habit for each one of these milestones, if you will, like for Crush or for C, curate your accounts? Like what's one thing that people need to get into the habit of doing?
Yes. So with curating the accounts, one thing that I talk about, it's kind of interspersed across that whole chapter, but it's just this idea of curating versus just collecting. So what I notice is that a lot of people collect accounts, like they have a brokerage account, but they don't know why. Like they have multiple 401k sitting out in the universe, but they don't know that they're out there and they don't count it as real money. So the 5 habits that are in there are all around the idea of treat your money as like an art collection rather than just as like a mishmash of stuff, which is what most people's stuff looks like. So I always use the analogy of like, think of an art curator. And I'll ask you, like, as a curator, what kind of skills you need to be a curator?
You have to have an eye for something unique. You can't just be like out here buying shit on eBay and thinking you found the next like Monet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I probably shouldn't use art because I have zero like eye for anything in art. For me, it would be sneakers, right? Like, how do you know if this is a good deal on sneakers? Like, I was so excited the other day to digress was, I saw a pair of Air Jordan 3s for like $60 and I was like, what? I'm going to buy these right now. But that's because I know that usually they're 120. So the same thing goes with curating your accounts and each of those habits talks about like, here's a little bit of a step that you can do to be more of a curator and not just open a brokerage account because you saw some finance bro say that you should be investing to.
Right. I think a lot of that happened during 2020 when everybody was opening a Robinhood account and buying Peloton stocks. And we learned very quickly like why you should not necessarily take investing advice from Reddit threads.
I
Not the
mean,
move.
hindsight is 2020, right? Like at the time, everyone's like, this is a great idea.
Yeah. All right. So R is reverse into independence. What does that mean?
So I talk a lot about financial independence. That's not something that I've coined myself, but I've really taken to heart this idea of feeling free to be able to do what you want every day in life and not just because you can afford it or not afford it. And so in curating your accounts, we start delving into, these like just clean up your stuff. But then when we go into reverse into independence, it's like, well, why are you doing this? Why are you actually trying to be better with your finances? And so in that chapter, we talk about different things that you can start framing a goal for yourself. And the one goal I have for everyone is to be financially free. And that there is an actual formula to that. And we talk about it in the book, but it's, again, not something that I came up with. It's the 25 times your annual expenses. What I find so fascinating about this is that the more and more people that I've taught it, just that one habit of checking in at least, once a quarter. If I were to look at my expenses, my monthly expenses today, and I were to annualize that and then do 25x that, chances are it's going to be the millions of dollars for most Americans. That one exercise helps me tell very quickly who is going to be rich and who's not. Because their reaction to it is either usually one of two things. It's either, oh, this is impossible and this is horseshit and I feel so hopeless now. Or it's like, oh, okay, I know the number now and I'm overwhelmed, but at least now I know. When I see those people's reactions, I can usually tell whether they're going to be a good coaching client or not. But I can also tell, like, even without me, that they're probably going to end up being wealthy anyway, because that exercise itself, now you can't say you don't know.
Yeah. Now you're just an ostrich sticking their head in the sand if you decide to not proceed. And I think the 25x rule is great for introducing folks to the concept of FIRE, but I think you're right in the sense that it does tend to overwhelm people oftentimes. And I like to just invite folks to understand that there's a variety of versions of financial independence. And so don't close yourself off to the idea that you can't create some version of this, because it is more accessible to more people than they would realize if they get out of this scarcity mindset and they get out of accepting being underpaid and overworked, which is probably the single biggest thing that's contributing to this feeling fucking impossible.
Absolutely. And, I always point people towards your content too, because you've been able to accomplish financial independence in having a lot of these different passive income streams. And I took the path of, kind of building out assets and then trying to squeeze passive income out of it later on in terms of investments. And I think both ways are absolutely great. What I think is super interesting is, and this is why I like the 25x rule, is just I tell people, it doesn't even really matter if you ever hit that number. The point is, what actions would you take in order to even have a chance, even have a shot? And sitting around and, oh my gosh, my favorite quote lately, I don't know where I saw it on Instagram. So whoever put it on Instagram, I'm so sorry. I'm not crediting you right now, but they said worrying is basically worshiping the problem. And when you frame it that way to say, okay, am I going to keep spending more time worshiping the problem? Worrying isn't going to get you to any financial independence, whether they go down the route of passive income, whether they go down the route of content creation or investing into the stock market. Doing nothing is not going to get you there. And so my favorite analogy, just because I happened to see her last Wednesday and it was so exciting, I saw Simone Biles perform like the GOAT.
Yeah.
And imagine what the Olympics would be like if everyone was just like, you know what? I'm never going to win a gold medal, so I shouldn't even bother trying.
Yeah, it'd be worthless.
It would suck. But, and so I tell people to think like an Olympian when it comes to your finances. Even if you never win the gold medal, which is reaching that financial independence number, even if you reach 10% of that number, wouldn't you still be better off than where you are now? And that tends to move people faster than just saying, to your point, here's a number. It's either that or nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And considering the fact that I think I read somewhere recently that over 50% of millennials have nothing saved for retirement. I mean, doing something at this point is fucking better than nothing.
Literally. I'm not a data expert, but I feel like that number is low because every millennial I talk to doesn't have it. Doesn't have much.
You might just have a skewed audience. And that's why they're calling you. They're like, Bernadette.
That's probably why they're following me on Instagram, actually.
All right. So the U stands for understand your net worth, and you have net in parentheses. So what are we talking about here?
So I put net in parentheses because this is both the exercise of now we're starting to get into the how do you evaluate your self-worth and your net worth. But my favorite habit in there that I feel like you would also appreciate, I call it the new negotiation norm, where just making negotiation a habit. Just deciding that you're going to negotiate your pay every year, no matter what. And so I give some tips there of specific things that you can do to negotiate your pay, whether you are like us, like where we're negotiating contracts maybe with other clients, or if you're a salaried or an hourly employee. As a former HR person, I was in HR for 10 years. I still am baffled by the fact that in that 10 years, I literally had less than a handful of women ever negotiate me on pay. And that's something that I really, really am strong about. I don't know that I should say this, but maybe anytime I had that thought, it means that I'm probably going to say it. So recently, when it came to some of this content, I had a partner of mine basically come to me and say, hey, we want you to do this hours upon hours of work, but since you didn't put it into the original contract, then we just assume you're going to do it all for free. And literally wrote, and we just assume it's going to be free. You know how sometimes people are like, oh, let's do a collaboration. Like they try to like pretend that they're like doing something. No, they just straight up said, we're not paying you. And I said to them, first of all, I was really pissed. And then after I wasn't mad anymore, I wrote back to them and I said, here's what I know is that if it weren't me doing it, you would hire someone else and you would be paying them. So I just ask that you pay me fairly. Also, you're asking me to take 3 to 4 days off of my regular revenue generating business to do this type of work. So you should pay. But also in my new book, I have a chapter about negotiating. And there is no way that I will be promoting a book about advocating for fair pay, especially for women and women of color, and then take this deal. And so my favorite thing was that almost immediately I got a response, and it was from a woman who said, personally and professionally, I applaud you doing this and will pay you.
It's like, why can't y'all just come out with that shit? But at the end of the day, that self-advocacy is the difference between getting what you want and settling for what they give you.
That's right. I talked about this with my business group this morning where we talked about asymmetric risk and reward. And so when I talk about asymmetric risk and reward, it simply is what we kind of all know intuitively is that you take as little risk as possible for as much reward as possible. But as women in particular, lately, especially, I feel like we were over this stuff like in 2020 or whatever, but apparently not. Is the world is only getting faster. The world is only putting more AI and all other stuff. Like you have to continue to remind people what the value is that you offer. And it's not about you as a person. It's about the services that you provide when it comes to a business transaction. And I'm still getting a lot of clients who just are afraid to negotiate because the downside is they're going to say no. But I'm like, that's literally the only downside. And some people say, well, what if they fire me after this and whatever? I'm like, well, as an HR person, I'll give you plenty of reasons why that cannot happen. But that's where I'm really encouraging everyone who's listening here is the habit that I really want every woman to cultivate is that you should negotiate your pay every year minimally, if not every quarter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you keep getting no where you're at, like loyalty doesn't pay a lot of the times, y'all. So this whole idea that you might have had instilled in you by your parents about you just find a comfortable, safe, stable place to work and you work there until you retire, that shit is not the move, especially nowadays. I've never seen anybody get the type of raises that you get when you job hop to different organizations by just staying in the same place and accepting those 2 to 3% cost of living raises. Like, it's just not going to happen. So at the end of the day, like, worry about your damn self because your company likely has no problem cutting you off of their roster when the numbers aren't working or there's a reorg or there's a merger, an acquisition. Like there's so many reasons why they can decide to get rid of you that you just really need to understand. If you're not advocating for yourself, you're doing yourself a huge disservice.
I tell people if I ever get out of the coma of writing this book and I decide I ever want to write a book again, which probably not, but if I forget about it, then people say it's like having a child or like having childbirth. You're like, oh yeah, it was terrible during the time. But then afterwards, you're like, no, let's have another one. Right. Yeah. I think that's the same thing about books, but I definitely want to write a book at some point, or maybe just short stories of all of this stuff that people don't know happens behind the scenes in HR.
Yes. An expose.
Oh, yeah. I'm ready to spill some tea on that one because I promise you, they do not care about you. I'm saying that as a former person sitting in those rooms, making those decisions about who stays and who goes. And what I love about the negotiation habit is that it stacks with what I just told you all earlier. If you curate your accounts and you know exactly where you stand and where your money is clean, and then you know how much money you need in order to not have to ever negotiate again, then you'll realize like you have no choice but to negotiate because there's no other way to accelerate that process without advocating for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're on to S, spend intentionally. I think I know what this means, but tell us.
I don't know. I got kind of tired of all the different advice out there about rice and beans and like live a terrible life or whatever. And I actually am like such a big proponent. One of my favorite habits in this one is I actually tell people to eat out, and that will actually save you money.
That is very controversial, ma'am, because the whole, especially Latinos, okay, the Latino folks listening to this, we grew up with the fucking mantra at home that said, hay comida en casa, which means there's food at home. Okay. So no, we don't need to go out. So you're giving us permission to say, fuck the norm. We're listening to Bernadette and she said I can go to Chili's.
Yeah. Well, maybe not Chili's, but like a step up from Chili's. Actually, you know what? Not to hate on Chili's. They have some good specials there. So I'm not going to lie. I haven't gone to Chili's in a while, but last time I went there actually wasn't bad. So yeah, so I call it the fine dining allowance. And so I spelled it as fine to go with financial independence. But the reason I talked about eating out specifically, and I think I've always joked about this with you, is like Filipinos were like the Latinas of Asia. Like we just have these big ass Catholic families and like all this guilt and, and food wise, actually, there's a lot of like derivatives, right, that are similar. Like we have our own version of adobo and stuff, right? So anyway, the reason I brought this up was that this is where I'm going to sound like very controversial to certain audiences, right? It's just like, if you just eat regular American food, then actually, no, I don't think eating out is worth it, because most American food is just like grease and fat and carbs. But I venture to tell people that like, if you're going out to eat I have like what I call the 4 C's. One is for culture. So if you're going out to eat to have a cultural experience. So for me, for example, like I will not make certain Filipino dishes because 1, I don't know how to, and 2, if I did, it would taste terrible. Then I think that's a great reason to go out and eat, to actually experience either your own culture as comfort food or to experience someone else's culture. Then also there's a lot of debate about whether or not you're eating out healthy. I would say if you actually spend some time to find some healthy choices like in your own city, then it actually can be healthier than eating at home. Because I know me, when I'm at home, like I'll just eat trash sometimes just because, I'm lazy. But I can go across the street from my current apartment, and there's a great Mediterranean place that my husband and I, it's plenty of food when we split one meal, and it's cheaper for us to go there and eat healthier than at home. But the 2 biggest reasons that I tell people where it will actually save you money on eating out is around the other C that I think is most important, particularly for parents and for you, like a parent to be, is just like conserving energy. If someone like you, for example, like you're actually a great example of this, is just like your hourly rate and what you can make in your business versus you doing dishes, it just doesn't make sense.
Nope.
Right. And then, because I have all friends who have kids under the age of 3 right now, just like, you're not going to have energy to do any of that stuff. So I posted yesterday in LinkedIn, particularly my parent clients, who say like, hey, you're not a bad parent if your kids eat pizza every now and then or whatever. If that means that you can be focused on being a better mom or being better at your job or whatever it is. So conserving energy, if that requires you to eat out sometimes, that is okay. And then the last piece is the last C, which is my favorite, is around connection. And I honestly think, so when you say I comida at home, right? Like, that was also back in the day when everyone that was in your family lived in close proximity. But for a lot of millennials like you and I, like you don't live close to your family right now. I think they live in New Jersey, right? And my family lives like all over the place. So spending some extra money to go eat out, to see people once a week that I don't normally see, or to have a special meal, to treat my mom out to something, that to me is actually saving you money in the long run, because I don't have any data to back this up yet. That'll be my 3rd book, which is the more connected that you feel and the more that you actually feel like you're loved, then I think you're going to spend less money on bullshit.
That makes sense, because a lot of us are emotionally spending to fill some kind of void.
And I know that anytime the thing that always comes up in personal finance is like coffee is like a waste of money or whatever, right? But I recently went out for quote unquote coffee with a friend who was going through a really difficult time. And we both felt better after that. Like, sure, could we have just like sat somewhere and not drank coffee? But it was just the easy thing for us to do and to meet up. And so do I say that you have to eat out every day? No, but having a specific line item in your budget to purposefully eat out with the people that you like, with the food that actually nourishes you, and conserving energy from doing chores that you don't want to do, I think is actually a really great way to spend your money.
Yeah, I really love the kind of mindset behind that whole idea because I think oftentimes we spend money in ways that we're told to or that we think is acceptable according to society standards, right? And we can go back to the conversation around, is renting a waste of money versus buying a home? Or like for me, when I travel, I'm not a big, like, I need to go to every five-star restaurant in the vicinity, but I damn sure need a nice, luxurious hotel room. Something as simple as my mom and I went to the Zumba convention. I was already
I saw
pregnant.
that. I was so jealous.
Right. And one of the things that I was like, you know what? I'm going to spend money on Ubers to drive me 5 minutes down the road to the convention center because it's Orlando. It's 100 degrees. I'm pregnant. My back hurts. And I don't have the fucking wherewithal to go and walk 20 minutes out in the sun when I could spend a couple dollars and make the whole experience much more enjoyable. Some people might see that shit as like hella frivolous, but for me, it improves my quality of life in that moment. And so just being very clear on what is worth spending money on for your experience versus like what other people are telling you you should or should not spend money on is the whole mindset around that intentionality.
And I think, and also, I think uniquely American is like food in particular tends to be one of the budget items that is like always up for debate. So how much is really an appropriate amount of money to spend on food? And then people assume like, oh, if you're not spending a lot of money on food, then you must be eating unhealthy. And like, there's a lot of myths to be busted in that. And I love what you said about, just being focused on what improves your quality of life, and bringing up kind of the apartment example. In my apartment complex, there's a lot of people who get DoorDash, right? And always, I don't know why, but there's always a random McDonald's order waiting all the time. And I'm like, who's ordering? I never think to order DoorDash from McDonald's. And then I get a little judgy. And then I have to take myself back and be like, you know what? Maybe there's some interesting story behind that. Maybe their first job was McDonald's and whatever. Like, who am I to judge?
Listen, a big ass Egg McMuffin combo with a huge coffee hits the spot sometimes for me. And I will unapologetically pay $25, including tip, for a fucking Egg McMuffin if I'm craving it. So
I'm a 20-piece McNuggets and fries.
there you go. Sometimes it's just like being able to have that choice and being able to be unapologetic about how you spend your money. It's all part of like why we pursue financial independence in the first place. I love just not having to think about my grocery budget and just being able to like buy the shit that I want to buy and giving myself permission to like splurge on the steak or whatever. It's just about the freedom.
Yeah. And I think, like that's why I chose specifically the word spend intentionally. Because what I found now with coaching so many women in particular is that the guilt happens after they didn't set the intention first. So they're like, oh, I ate out and I feel guilty about it. But if I said, oh, I ate out because I went to go meet up with my best friend, then there's less guilt around it. So setting the intention around why you're eating out versus just eating out versus not is a different way to think about it.
That's great. Okay. And now we are at the last letter H, heal your money wounds. So essentially you're telling us we need to get fucking therapy.
Yes. I am not a therapist. So everyone should get a therapist. That should be your biggest investment. But my favorite habit in this chapter, interestingly, so I got my first book review from Publishers Weekly, and they pointed out this one in particular that they thought was interesting because it's not what you would expect to find in a money book. And it was what I call the Screenless Sunday, which is to digitally detox for your mental health. And so essentially the version of it that I do is I literally put my phone in my glove compartment in my car and I don't look at it for all of Sunday.
That's amazing. I wish I had that discipline.
It's great. So this past Sunday, because I did not have my phone, I rode my bicycle all around town. I went to yoga. I like meal prepped for the whole week. Like turns out you have a lot of time when you don't have your phone right there. And so if Sundays don't work for you, but I find that Sundays is actually the best day for most people, is purposefully putting down the phone and actually like locking it away somewhere. There are some extreme examples in South Korea. They actually have these clear boxes for people to put their phone in with like a lock and a timer on it so that they can't get to it, because that's how addicted people are there. And there's these reality shows where you see these celebrities who literally have their phone like locked in this box, and all they're doing is sitting there and like looking at the phone because they're like, who's talking to me right now? Is my manager calling me or whatever? So I call this habit out in particular because my publisher actually pushed back on me on it. She said, what does this have to do with money? Why are you writing about, putting down your phone? Like, this is a money book. You should be talking about money things. And I was just like, do you not know that in 2024 that everyone is spending more money because of Instagram ads and keeping up with the Joneses? And so I put in some specific statistics in there. But the point of it, though, too, is a lot of people's money wounds also tend to get opened up when they look at what other people are doing all the time instead of just focusing on actually living your life right now. So that was new for me.
Yeah, that comparison trap will have you thinking that you're failing at life. Your career's not where it should be. Your personal life's not where it should be. Your money situation's not where it should be. That shit is hella toxic. And I know even as like an entrepreneur, we can fall into that trap as well of just seeing like, oh my gosh, she's doing all these things. Like, why isn't this happening for me? That shit does not serve you.
Not only does it not serve you, but now, the statistics are showing that people are just depressed. It's causing straight up depression. And so, when I talk about the 25 habits, this is what I love about the way that we structured it, is that I ask people I don't even ask you to do all 25 habits. I don't even ask you to do 10 of them. I ask everyone to pick one habit from each section and see how you might be able to stack it. So this, screenless Sunday stacks really well with this fine dining thing, where to say like, okay, on Sunday, instead of going on my phone, let me actually just call my friend and let's go out and do something together. And let's both promise not to bring our phone or leave our phones in the car. And I really want people to hear this when I say it, is just that, even if you listen to someone like a me or someone like a Janice, like I know like behind the scenes, Janice and I talk a lot about like things that we're struggling with or things that are not going great for us. Like what you see on social media obviously isn't true, and I think people understand that intellectually, but it's when I look at people's budgets, and this is why it's related to money, they're not really understanding it. Because then they're spending money on this stuff. And I'm like, well, why do you need to do a lot of this stuff? And it's because it's being triggered by what they're seeing on social media. So that's why it became a money habit, is to actually have a good digital detoxing routine once a week, just like you would do self-care of like, oh, let me like do my skincare routine once a week. Just do anything else but be on a phone. And you'll actually probably feel a lot better about your finances too.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of folks use these devices and this screen time to kind of disassociate with things that maybe you just don't want to address in your life, whether that's like you hate your fucking job. And so you're going to spend all of Sunday scrolling because you've got the Sunday scaries because you're like, oh my God, we got to go do this again for the next week. It's like that detachment from the distraction actually gives you the space to start really coming to terms with like what's working, what's not. It gives you some clarity to really like know what's going on up here.
That, and also to have conversations with people who actually get you and know you. Like I so am honored when you say, oh, you're one of those girls that just get it. But I think we can say that because we've spoken enough times and I've seen you in real life. Versus what I think is happening a lot of times is people are taking financial advice, relationship advice, emotional advice from people that they've never met before and saying, and they don't have the full picture. So part of where I think it's really important for people to have really good money habits is to, and we talk about this in this Heal Your Money Wounds too, is to rebuild this like small circle of people that actually know you as a person, that you can bounce these ideas off of what you're planning to spend financially. Because for my friends, they know that me spending money on like my favorite food is like shabu, which is like hot pot. It's expensive, but like it makes me so happy. So they would never shame me about that. Whereas someone else might be like, why would you like go somewhere to cook your own food? Like that doesn't make sense. But my friends who actually have met me and known me for a long time will say, well, that tracks. That makes sense. So I think for everyone who's listening to this is like, find someone like a Janice in your real life as well, or take the opportunities to actually go meet some of these people in real life. Like I'm going to FinCon next week and I go there purposefully for the fact of just seeing some people and like actually hugging them in real life. I'm not really there to like educate myself anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's just a big reunion.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so let's also talk about a topic that you already know I'm hella passionate about, because the thing that frustrates me around so much of the personal finance advice out there, especially ones that are catered towards women, is this idea of like deprivation of if you could just be better at budgeting, if you could just save more money, You can make more progress financially. And I'm like, stop. Let's stop with the bullshit because that's not what we're telling men to do. We're telling men to go out there and make more fucking money. So why is that something that we should also be focusing on, especially as women of color? And how has increasing your income personally impacted your financial journey?
Well, I will tell you this. You gave me such a gift with inviting me to your summit in Puerto Rico last year. Because I actually looked at a clip from it and I said at the time, because I had no other way of like knowing this, was I think when I was there, I said, oh, my net worth is 1.2. And then I looked at my net worth right before getting on this call and I was like, okay, we're at like 1.78. So that means in a little over a year, like a year and 3 months, my husband and I, our net worth grew by over 500K. That didn't happen from just saving money and like not eating out and whatever, all this other stuff. Like we both grew our incomes, but we also invested a ton. And it was even wild to me to see that because like, when you're in it, you don't really notice a difference. So having that mark point back in June of last year to say, okay, we were at 1.2 and now we're at 1.7. But here's the interesting thing. I didn't make 500K in my business. And so some portion of that was I did grow my revenue year over year and I did grow my net income year over year. But a lot of that was investments I had made that are starting to grow and starting to pay out dividends. And so what I think is really important about what you said is that women are not getting this messaging. But here's the hard part. And this is the part where I struggle with sometimes is sometimes I am giving this messaging and then they're still not hearing it because they've had 30, 40 years of being told otherwise. So obviously me or you saying it once or twice or even 10 times if they listen to this podcast every week, it's going to take a long time for that to override their existing scripts. So the best way that I have figured out on how I can educate and like inspire women to actually make some moves on it is that I am very vocal about what my net worth is, which is controversial too. Some people are saying like, you shouldn't say that because it's tacky to talk about money or privacy issues or whatever.
We're going to come and kill you.
Yeah. Right. But I'm like, there's no other way for women to actually understand this unless they see a real life case study. When we talk about compounding interest, like no one really understands what that looks like until you show some numbers. And then when you see numbers, you're like, is that a real person? It's like, yes, I'm a real person who grew $500,000 in net worth in just a little over a year because I did not just settle for paying down debt and putting money away into savings. I also looked at investing and growing my income.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Another thing you talk about as well is how growing your income has now enabled you to become something that is quite rare in the women of color category, which is becoming an accredited investor. So you and I are both accredited investors. And can you first tell us what that means and then also practically what that looks like for you?
Yeah. There is no test you have to take. There's no certification. It's basically when investing entities look at you, they'll see if you meet one of a couple of criteria. Either you make $200,000 individually, you make $300,000 as a couple, you have $1 million in net worth, excluding the value of your home. So you just have to fit one of those categories, or you have a license that allows you to do investing type of deals. And so the thought behind it is that if you have that much money, or you have that much knowledge, like you shouldn't somehow fuck up your finances, taking some risks on investments that are not generally open to like the riffraff, right? So, and when I say riffraff, I really mean like there's some riffraff in the investing world where, like you said, people on Reddit are saying you should invest in this. And it's like, but like, what's your qualification in saying that? So for me, I've actually decided that I wanted to become an accredited investor on the route of the $1 million of net worth, whereas most people really go through it on the income level because it's faster to go through the income level. But I wanted to be able to retire early such that I would still be an accredited investor and might not be making that much income in a given year. So practically speaking, what does that mean for me? What has been really exciting is this past year, I've been actually taking some courses and we're planning to do some collaborations with another organization called Invest for Better, which is specifically focused on helping women understanding investing. And so I've been taking classes with women around aligned investing, sustainable investing, and angel investing. And so aside from the stock market, as an accredited investor, there's so many other ways that you can invest money that would have not only higher returns, but it could actually make the world a better place. And so that's where I've been really excited about thinking about how I want to do that going forward. And right now I have a cohort of 7 businesses that I'm coaching that if they do a good job, that I will be willing to put up some of my own money into their businesses.
That's really exciting. Yeah. So there's pretty much like off the books investments that you can invest in, whether that is into private equity, where you're funding a startup that you think might be like the next unicorn that pops off. You can also access private real estate deals, like real estate syndications, where maybe you love the idea of being a owner per se in real estate, but you don't want to deal with the day to day of like being a landlord. So as an accredited investor, you can purchase access into a real estate syndication, and then there are professionals that manage these properties for you, and you just get a nice rental check every month. And so there's a lot of different ways that the ultra wealthy are making money that is not generally accessible to folks like retail investing is in the stock market. And so it's just important to know that as you reach these upper echelons of wealth, you'll be introduced to many new concepts and many new ways of understanding how real wealth is built.
And I would also say there's so many women that I have coached recently who've already hit the requirements for accredited investing and had no idea that that was an option. And they were like, "Oh, should I put money into Apple?" And I'm like, "Girl, like let's
Let's find the new Apple.
let's find the new Apple." Exactly. And there's also a lot of Steph, my podcast co-host, she does a great episode on our podcast around us basically like looking at your executive compensation and looking at even if you are working at a company that has the potential to be the next Apple or whatever. A lot of women are just not well versed in that. And so a lot of what I want to focus on in the kind of next couple of years is there's a lot of women who've already kind of hit some of these levels, and especially women of color who just don't have the network around them to tell them like, here's the other options. And I will say, even in my current investing circles, I'm thinking right now, like the one that I'm in right now, out of like 12 women, there's only me, one other woman who isn't white and who isn't over 50. So there is this new generation of women like you and me who are building wealth like sooner, earlier in our lives, and we're not getting that data. And so there's a lot of work to be done in getting women to understand that there's all these other options beyond the stock market.
Absolutely. And I think there's something also very empowering about being in a position where you can help these startups that are founded by people of color, because historically, just the access to investor capital is very limited to entrepreneurs of color. And so us being able to move that needle from a grassroots community perspective, I think that's how we continue to reshape the landscape of what business looks like, what entrepreneurship looks like, and what the culture around wealth creation looks like. I'm really excited to see companies like Siete Foods, which started off as a little mom and pop Mexican food, get acquired by fucking Pepsi for $1.2 billion. Like, imagine if you were in that seed entry round. Hello, you'd be taking home a nice check right now.
And I love that you shared that as an example, because a lot of women in particular will look at investing and look at these companies. They're like, well, I'm not that interested in them. I'm like, there's so many cool businesses out there right now that are doing some interesting things. And it's not all tech. That's the other thing I want people to understand is a lot of money is going towards tech. And there's so many, I call them analog businesses, where it's just like right now, like I have in my roster of potential investments, I have an interior designer, I have someone who's doing EV charging stations. I have someone, and one of the ones that I'm looking at right now, she provides non-emergency medical transport, like in the city for, like if elderly have to go to their doctor's appointments. And Charlotte is not a very easy place to navigate. And so I'm excited about businesses like that because it's stuff that our community actually really needs. And women and communities of color are more impacted by not having reliable transportation than the general public. And so that's where you can make money and actually do good things. That's actually possible.
I love it. You know what else is going to do really good things? This book when it gets into people's hands. Okay. So tell us where we can get a copy of Crush Your Money Goals and what folks can expect.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for having me. The book comes out December 10th. It's Crush Your Money Goals. You can go to crushyourmoneygoals.com and it'll be available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, like all the usual places. I would love if you would leave us a review on any of those channels. And this week, I'm getting ready to record the audiobook. So if you want to hear my
Ooh.
voice for several hours straight, you can do that too with the book. And I'm really excited about it, but also kind of nervous because I've never talked for 12 hours straight before. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, it's a good thing that you have podcasting experience. So, I can't imagine anybody else reading the book to us. Folks, get a copy of both because it really is a different experience when you are holding the book and you can put notes in it versus when you're actually hearing it told by the narrator/author. And it's the holiday season. So instead of buying somebody some bullshit that's going to collect dust, let's give the gift of financial literacy by supporting women of color authors who are doing incredible things like yourself, Bernadette. Thank you so much for A, for writing this book, for B, being unapologetic as fuck about money, and C, just being the incredible person that you are. I love every conversation that we have, and I know that folks will absolutely be inspired by this one.
Thank you so much. I am so grateful for you, and thanks everyone for listening today.
Thank you.